Welcome back. The brutal attritional war in Syria has provoked the greatest human migration since the Second World War. Millions displaced from their homes, millions more fleeing the country in fear of their lives. In a moment, we're going to be live in Sicily, where some of those refugees are brought ashore. But the vast majority are now living in makeshift camps in the countries bordering Syria. Sky News Arabia's Larissa Aoun went to the Riyak refugee camp in Lebanon's Bekaa Valley to explain the impact the crisis is having across that region.
This camp located in the Bekaa area is one of the hundreds of unofficial refugee camps spread across Lebanon, hosting thousands of Syrian refugees who fled their hometown because of the ongoing war in Syria. Here, it's a daily struggle to get milk for babies, food, clean water, medication for those in need. Families are also struggling to send their kids to school. But when you look around, you see most of the children hanging around the camp deprived of education. Men are trying to find jobs to help their families, but they are always underpaid. And whatever they gain is barely enough to buy milk and bread. Talking to refugees in these camps will make you understand the severity of the situation.
We need so many things over here. I was registered with the UNHCR, but they removed my name from their list recently. I have 4 kids, all small and I'm pregnant. No one comes to visit this camp. We need so many things. We get no aid from anybody, not even from the UN agencies. My son, who is 9, is working in the potato fields. He was registered in school, but I can't afford it now, so no school. There is no place like Syria. We all hope to go back. All we want is to go back.
Lebanon, which has a national population of 4 million, is hosting more than 1 million Syrian refugees. So the impact on the infrastructure and economy is huge, not to mention the stress it's causing the Lebanese hosting communities. International aid is not enough. There's no official plan put in place.
I have 4 kids. My husband was severely injured in Syria. We were in Aleppo when it was bombarded with barrel bombs. We were stuck there for 4 days without food until someone we know took us out and drove us to the border with Lebanon. But I wish we stayed in Syria. We are 6 people and I'm the only one working and making $4 per day, which is barely enough to buy bread and cigarettes. My son and husband are sick and need an operation, but the UNHCR hospitals are not paying the medical expenses for the operation needed. It's real misery. Our tents are not ready for winter. Water is leaking. We only await the help of God.
Lebanese government and UN agencies have requested $2.1 billion in international aid to respond to the refugee crisis, but they have received so far 30% of the funds needed. It's a real humanitarian disaster with no hope in the near future. The only hope for these families is fleeing this country to another hosting country, probably in Europe, hoping the situation over there would be better.
Larissa Aoun there in the Bekaa Valley. What then should the international community do? And in the UK, what should we do? I'm joined by Britain's former ambassador to the United Nations, Sir Jeremy Greenstock, by Hamish DBG, who was head of the British Army's Chemical, Biological and Nuclear Regiment and who's recently returned from Syria himself, and by the Shadow International Development Secretary, Diane Abbott. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Hamish, first of all, Prince Hassan, they're talking about safe havens. And within those safe havens, then, people have already said you're going to need troops on the ground to manage those, aren't you?
Well, I'm not entirely sure that's the case, or certainly not troops from the coalition fighting at the moment. I was discussing this very thing with FSA commanders only 2 weeks ago. The charity I support, Syria Relief, and OSAM run all the medical facilities in northwest Syria under the protection of the FSA and others. And if we could provide just some sort of no-bomb zone or no-fly zone, whatever you want to call it, stop barrel bombs landing in northwest Syria, we believe that we could provide that security that His Royal Highness is talking about that would prevent. There are 500,000 refugees in northwest Syria. I've been through those camps, but not for a few months. They are places of despair and poverty. I get the feeling that those refugees are about to turn right to ISIL or left to Europe. But given security, building on the medical work that we do and get other aid into them, I think at this critical time, as the weather's about to change, we could prevent that and have a bridgehead, give hope that actually we could develop that start getting more aid in there and people going back to Syria rather than leaving.
Diane Abbott, I mean, the mood in Westminster has changed quite a lot in the last few months. There seems to be more enthusiasm, perhaps to even revisit the idea of military action, or certainly some sort of more forceful intervention.
I don't think that there's still much appetite for sending British troops to put their boots on the ground. That's the problem. And the problem with no-fly zones and the rest of it, I've listened, obviously, you're a military man, but it's hard to see how no-fly zones can be made to work if there are no troops on the ground. People have been very moved by the films and the photographs I've seen of the refugees, and we need to do more for the refugees. The rest of the EU needs to step up in terms of aid for those refugee camps. Actually, Britain has been relatively generous.
OK, well, safe havens, aid camps, areas of protection, no-fly zones, all that involves parking ourselves and our authority on President Assad's land. It involves the Russians as well, taking an opinion on that. I mean, how hard is that sort of stuff to sell in New York, Sir Jeremy?
I don't think that would be so difficult to sell in New York, but we're still addressing the symptoms and not the causes of this. These camps could be there for many years. Syria is going to go on being a terrible battlefield unless there's a political solution. And there won't be a political solution unless everybody involved, all the stakeholders inside and outside, start putting the Syrian people first. And actually, when you put it like that and move the motivations of the Russians to protect Assad and the Americans and the West to hit ISIS, when you put the Syrian people first, you realize that actually, as Prince Hassan has just said, that is the only common denominator. Otherwise, this war is going to go on for much longer because the Russians are supporting Assad and because that is motivating the Gulf states and Saudi Arabia and others, including Jordan and the West, to support the
let's
Syrian
visit
rebels.
the prospect of contagion in just a moment. First of all, though, let's just take a look at the situation in the south. Aid agencies had expected the number of refugees coming to Europe to slow as winter approaches. In fact, it seems to be picking up, with 7,000 a day now arriving in Greece alone. And that's put unprecedented pressure on Europe's borders. Well, we can go live to Augusta in Sicily now, where we're joined by a Sky Italia correspondent, Nicola Vesci. What's the situation where you are, Nicola?
Good evening from Augusta. This is one of the harbors where most of the migrants are saved at sea in the Mediterranean Sea. Last summer, 106,000 people have been brought safe from the Italian Navy and the other navies participating to the operation in the Mediterranean Sea under the European Union flag. There's two operations right now going on in the Mediterranean Sea. One is from the European Union, which aims mainly to stop the smugglers and arrest the smugglers, also save lives. And the other one is led by the Italian Navy only. The international operation so far has permitted to arrest about 16 smugglers. Numbers much bigger have been reached by the Italian Navy, which is conducting this operation with, ever since last March. It's named Mare Sicuro, in English, Secure Sea. And the chief commander here with me is Francesco Iavazzo, is the chief commander of OPV Betica, the boat the ship that just this afternoon came back after operation 13 days at sea. How tough has it been so far, your work?
Well, I can just tell you that I assumed command of this ship on 11th of September, and since then I spent more days out at sea than actually alongside. We just came for 13 days out at sea, pretty busy, trying to look after the interest, the national interest, protecting our people out at sea. We're trying to look after our fishing boat, our merchant vessel, our coast guard, saving people in the sea. We've been pretty much trying to protect the national interest, Italian national interest in the sea.
Protecting the Italian national interest means also saving lives. You told me before that you saved in the past month about 250 people.
That's it, yeah, exactly. 250 people picked up from the sea. All the ages, a lot of children, under 18, also infants. I happened to, during the last mission, we picked up 4 children, age between 5 and 6 months, so you know, very small, very young, something that really touches your heart. I'm a father, and you know, some really touching, really touching. Yeah.
It is a very tough job, the one that does the job done by our Italian Navy. That will keep going on in the next upcoming months. Today is a safe day because the sea is quite rough, so there's not many people arriving. But they will keep working all through the winter because there's more people coming through the Mediterranean Sea to the Italian shore. It's all from here. Back to you, Andrew.
Nicola, thanks very much indeed. Nicola Vesci there from Sky Italia, just bringing us up to speed with the operation there in Sicily. And the refugees, the migrants, we should talk about that in a moment. First of all, just to pick up one thing, Hamish, to Bretton Gordon, that was in the documentary that we had, this former SAS commando saying that what struck him most about his trip to the front line, both in Iraq and Syria, was how the YPG and the FSA and other fighters were armed with such rudimentary weaponry, Second World War rifles, against an ISIS that was armed with equipment that mostly captured from the Iraqi army, which had been supplied by the Americans and the West years previously.
Well, that's what I've seen with the FSA in northwest Syria. You know, they're all as brave as lions, and they're desperate to, you know, take the fight to ISIL. And in fact, the commander in northwest Syria, you know, is very proud that he's pushed ISIL out of that area. But they are using sort of Second World War type weaponry.
So should we arm them? Should we?
Well, I
think
we should certainly train and advise them. I have to be very careful, obviously, when I'm discussing it with them. But they have very little concept on how to do what in the British Army we'd know as sort of combined arms sort of battle, and some advice in that area I think they would be far more effective against ISIL. And I think looking at ISIL itself, they are fighting quite conventionally at the moment. I saw some papers very recently that they're almost structured in some cases like a British battalion or company, and I think this provides a real opportunity, which is why we must strike them now before they turn into the sort of insurgency that we're so used to in Iraq and Afghanistan.
If we can. I mean, Diane Abbott, everyone in this country now knows that this whole thing is on hot coals, isn't it? We don't know how far to go, we don't know who to be friends with, how far to help our friends. What moves can we make? I mean, what do you think is a solid step forward that we can be sure of as a country, or indeed as a European continent, to start pushing things in a different direction?
This is a three-sided civil war, and you've got Russia in there as well. I hear what you say about training the FSA and so on better, but actually we have to get to the roots of ISIL, and that actually goes to what my colleague here was saying about getting, about in the end, it's about a political, diplomatic solution which all the major powers of the region, including Iran, play a role.
Can we move this forwards? I mean, at the moment, are we at loggerheads, do you think, with the Russians? Or is there some sort of communication and possibly cooperation down the line going to come out of this sharing airspace over Syria?
I don't think there are two states involved outside Syria who have the same objectives. The Russians say that they're worried about ISIL, and they are, because the violent jihadism could do a lot of damage in Russia through Chechnya, etc. They are worried about it, but they're not gearing up to put getting rid of ISIL first. They're supporting Assad, they're protecting their own interest in northwest Syria, they're tweaking the West's nose. There isn't a sense of purpose between enough states to get this done.
But they've moved so swiftly, and the reports from New York would suggest that even Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister from Moscow, was surprised when all this unfolded a few weeks ago.
I'm not surprised he was surprised. These things come out of the Kremlin. And it was a very astute move in the short term. Whether it's an astute move in the longer term, I'm not quite so sure. I think the Russians are in danger of putting their feet in a big mangle in Syria.
But what should the British government do? I mean, diplomatically, politically.
Two things that we're already doing. One is stay out off the ground.
Yeah.
Air doesn't matter very much, but we will help our allies in the air. The other is support the camps, put money into the refugees, and help the refugees in Europe. But in the Security Council, we are very good when others have the will with us in getting political solutions out of a bare foundation.
I want to bring in Hamish here. I mean, one thing we failed with in Iraq and Libya is what to do after it's over. Can we put together any kind of plan at the moment for what to do post-Assad or post-conflict?
Well, I think you're absolutely right there, and having fought in both those wars and spent a lot of time in Iraq and Afghanistan, I saw it firsthand. But I think, you know, the main thing that I've got from all my work in and out of Syria is trying to give the Syrian people some hope, reinvesting in them. And by doing that, creating some sort of stability.
Stability being the final word I have to take for you tonight,
Absolutely.
Hamish. Thanks very much indeed. Coming up, Anna Botting will have all today's headlines. It just remains for me to thank my guests, Diane Abbott, Hamish de Bretton Gordon, and Sir Jeremy Breenstock. And thank you for watching.